that foreign aid is phased out and we start thinking about the forgotten Americans right here in the United States. If I'm elected in that first week, we're going to take a walk down to the National Endowment for the Arts. We're going to shut the place down, padlock it, and fumigate the building. Hey, George, read our lips. No second term Buchanan for president. Thank you very much.
He hasn't won a primary or a caucus yet, but Pat Buchanan has GOP leaders running scared. Tonight, we'll talk with Pat Buchanan.
Okay? I'll send you
This is ABC News Nightline. Substituting for Ted Koppel and reporting from Washington, Chris Wallace.
That sound you could hear in Republican political circles today was the air going out of Pat Buchanan's campaign. Last night, President Bush shut out Buchanan, beating him in all 8 primaries by landslide margins. Today, party elders from Richard Nixon to Bob Dole suggested it may be time for Buchanan to call it quits. And even the feisty candidate himself was beginning to talk about making a graceful exit. But if Buchanan's roller coaster ride through the primaries has been one of the big stories of this campaign, so too has the bitter criticism he has received along the way. In recent weeks, Buchanan has been called everything from racist to anti-Semitic to fascist. The candidate has returned the fire and kept going. Tonight, we want to examine both of these stories, where Buchanan is headed and why some people are saying such terrible things about him. Nightline's Jeff Greenfield reports.
Hey, Pat Buchanan, you've just lost all 8 Super Tuesday primaries by 2-to-1 margins or worse. You trailed President Bush in delegates 583 to 46, and you haven't hit 40% of the vote yet anywhere. What are you going to do next?
We're going to California.
Judged by conventional political standards, Pat Buchanan's campaign for the presidency might seem right out of fantasy land. After all, what did he say after losing the Georgia primary by a near 2-to-1 margin?
I think that President Bush should begin to give consideration to standing down as a candidate for renomination for the Republican Party.
It is simply not usual for a candidate who has never run for anything, never held any policy-making office, to demand that the sitting president of his own party abandon the field of battle. And it has left friends and foes alike asking the same question that was asked of Jesse Jackson 4 years ago. What does he really want?
Pat Buchanan is up to pursuing the leadership of the conservative movement in America and maybe the presidency in 1996.
I think he actually thinks there's a small chance he can become president of the United States in 1992, and a somewhat larger chance he can become the leader of the conservative movement and possibly become president of the United States in 1996.
His more realizable goals are to frame the issues in such a way that it forces President Bush to choose on a number of matters, particularly social issues and also economic. And secondly, to give Pat a place at the table for 1996.
Okay, there's the bully boy thing.
But you really can't understand this campaign unless you realize that it is just the latest in a series of battles that Pat Buchanan has been fighting literally all of his life. At the heart of the Buchanan campaign and at the heart of his political philosophy lies one key premise, that the nation's capital, where Buchanan was born, raised, educated, where he's lived and worked just about his entire life, has been captured by an occupying force indifferent or hostile to traditional American values and interests. For Buchanan, then, politics is not about the art of compromise or mediation. It is a never-ending battle between us and them. The 53-year-old Buchanan, one of 9 children, was raised in a home where his father's word was law, where loyalty to family and faith were absolutes, and where he was taught the love of combat, both verbal and physical. He brought that combativeness into the Nixon White House as a speechwriter, to his columns and commentary, back into the White House in 1985 as Reagan's communication director, then back to the world of politics and punditry.
On the right, Pat Buchanan.
As a polemicist, Buchanan is unequal. His pen and tongue are dipped in acid. He paints not in pastels, but in dayglow. AIDS, he says, is nature's retribution for unnatural sex. The National Endowment for the Arts?
That upholstered playpen of the Arts and Crafts Auxiliary of the Eastern Liberal Establishment.
His description of Bush's secret dealings with China after Tiananmen Square?
1 month later, a secret visit from Eagleburger and Scowcroft, the Kowtow twins of Kissinger Associates.
His critics paint him in equally stark terms. Columnist William Raspberry.
Will disagree with the George Will, but wouldn't think to call him racist. I would never think to call Jack Kilpatrick racist. But Pat Buchanan comes off as a little different.
A strong critic of the Israeli government, Buchanan said this during the Gulf War buildup of 1990.
There are only two groups that are beating the drums right now for a war in the Middle East, and that is the Israeli Defense Ministry and its Amen corner in the United States.
First of all, it was anti-Semitic. Secondly, it was a lie. All the Arab states were beating the drums, and George Bush, and it turned out most of Congress was in favor of going to war, but he selected the Jews. Now that's no accident. He spoke deliberately. The man knows what he's saying.
Columnist Robert Novak says that charge is rooted in politics.
Even after the Rosenthal column, nobody responsible in the Republican Party said, yes, Pat Buchanan is an anti-Semite. They didn't join in. Very few journalists joined in. What happened was when he entered the presidential politics, then there entered a new level of criticism and attack on him.
Indeed, he did. GOP Chairman Rich Bond suggested that Buchanan was David Duke in a coat and tie. Congressman Newt Gingrich accused him of prejudice. Former drug czar William Bennett has suggested that Buchanan is flirting with fascism.
There's too much in Pat's writings, too much affection for the authoritarian figure, the Salazar, the Franco, even some nice words about Hitler. This, combined with the America First stuff, the seeming dislike or distrust of things foreign, things not born and bred in the good old USA, makes me nervous.
Other Republicans, like pollster Linda Duval, worry that Buchanan's message is just too divisive for a party trying to build a majority.
I don't think his message does anything to make us a growing, thriving party, not at all. Because it's a message of intolerance, it's a message of being very exclusive as opposed to inclusive.
Buchanan's pessimistic view of an America besieged sets him apart from the buoyant Morning in America optimism of Ronald Reagan. Robert Novak, who rejects much of the attack on Buchanan, says that he has not yet balanced the confrontational side of him.
I think that he is going to develop that side of him, but because he does not have that balance today, that does not really justify the trashing he is getting from both the news media and the Republican Party.
Today, Buchanan spoke in more muted tones about his prospects and his mission.
And if at some point you have lost the nomination to Mr. Bush, I would not do anything consciously to damage the chances of the Republican nominee in the Bush-Quayle ticket to be elected in November, because I think it's to be much preferred.
But whatever his next strategic move, Pat Buchanan has clearly signaled that, in his view, the battle for the conservative movement in America is his overriding cause, and that he has not yet begun to fight. I'm Jeff Greenfield for Nightline.
When we come back, we'll be joined by Republican presidential candidate Pat. Joining us now from our Washington studio is Republican presidential candidate Pat Buchanan. Mr. Buchanan, you seem to be signaling a change in your campaign today, suggesting that if and when the president clinches the nomination, that you may stop going after him. Does that mean that we're not going to be hearing any more about King George and Little Danny, as you put it?
No, Chris, we're going to be hearing a good deal more about them up in Michigan. Well, all I said was if Mr. Bush has the nomination mathematically locked up, then you take a hard look at the kind of campaign you conduct. But I've said we're going to take this campaign into California because it is about more than delegates. It's about more than the nomination. It's about where Mr. Bush is leading the Republican Party and where he is leading America. He has abandoned conservative principles, and I think he is leading America into this new world order, which he can't define or defend, and I think it bodes ill for my country. And we're going to maintain the debate as long as we can.
But one of the points you made, one of the options you said that you would consider is that if you continued through California, that you might take your attack ads off the air and be more philosophical. First of all, do you really think that you can bite your tongue for 2 or 3 months about George Bush? And what would be the point?
Well, the point in California would be to give those people out there who have been abandoned not only by Mr. Bush, the conservatives, but also by Pete Wilson, give them a vehicle to express their views about the future of the party and the country, Chris. I look upon these primaries, and I always have, as a national forum and a national debate where we're going to decide the destiny of our country. And it's the only chance we have every 4 years. If I hadn't got into this race, the the conservative view and the traditionalist view would not have been heard. Mr. Bush would have been able to posture as the conservative candidate when he is bogus in that role, in my judgment. So I don't think we need the counsel of those folks on how we're going to conduct our campaign. We're going to go all out in California, and we'll wait and see what strategy and tactics we'll use when we get there.
One of the things, as we said, that we want to do tonight is to examine your philosophy, to examine your statements, and why it is that they have led, frankly, some thoughtful people to call you some very harsh names: fascist, racist, anti-Semitic.
Right.
I'd like to start with something that you said at a rally in Georgia last month. You said that your hometown of Washington, D.C. had been a nice southern town, quote,
Right.
before all that crowd came rolling in and took it over.
Right.
Mr. Buchanan, who is that crowd?
The liberals.
That's who you meant by that?
Sure. Who did you think I meant? I grew up in a city of 800,000 people, 400,000 black, 400,000 white, wonderful town, wonderful community, and it has gone to the devil in a handbasket, so to speak, and I think liberalism is responsible for what has happened. The dominance of the Washington Post, the administration it helped put in office, the Great Society programs in D.C. We're killing 500 people in Washington, D.C. every single year. I used to be able to go down to Griffith Stadium on a bus with my 10-year-old brother.
Well, those aren't the liberals who are doing that, Mr. Buchanan.
No, it is liberalism that destroyed a wonderful city, in my judgment.
Well, let me ask you about
Sure.
that, because some people suggest that you use buzzwords, and then when you're called on them directly,
Sure.
you hide and change your tune.
Who says that?
Well, you recently told the London Sunday Telegraph, and again I quote, about a trip that your wife Shelley had taken down Connecticut Avenue, one of the
Right.
big streets here in Washington, and you said, quote, these guys were sitting in a corner playing bongo drums. I mean, this is the town I grew up in. What do you mean by that?
It's a very changed place.
Changed how?
It is changed. Listen, as I say, when I grew up in Washington, D.C., it was a traditionalist, conservative town, both black and white. It is a very changed place. We just had, last summer, a riot up in Adams Morgan, a place where I now understand there are 100,000 Salvadorians there, and one of them got up and said, if we don't get what we want from this city, we're going to burn it down. That's not the town I grew up in, and I think there's nothing wrong with pointing these things out. Every American is stunned at what is happening to the inner cities of the towns they grew up in.
But you make it sound like it's because of the fact that there are a growing number of minorities and a growing number of foreign third world immigrants. I mean, let me quote again.
Sure.
One of your columns, August of 1991, you were very explicit here. You said, quote, what happened to make America so vulgar and coarse?
Right.
And the main answer you gave is,
Was
since
it the main answer?
1965,
All right.
a flood tide of immigration has rolled in from the third world.
Well, listen, if you write, I'm sure if you get that column, you'll see a list of things that have changed the character of American society. We have in California, in Los Angeles, Chris, and you know it as well as I, there are gangs of street gangs of ethnic groups, many of which have come from outside the United States. And there is nothing wrong with pointing this out. Every American knows this. Let me tell you what I think is going on here, Chris. I'm a person of traditional values and views, and people who are trying to demonize me are trying to drive my views out of the national debate. What they're saying, in effect, is Pat Buchanan's views have no right to be heard. And the reason they're saying that, excuse me, is because these views are resonating among the American people who are a good people and who are thinking about problems like masses of illegal immigration, and there's nothing wrong with raising them in a national debate.
But I think what some people worry about, Mr. Buchanan, is that you're saying that the minorities and the immigrants are in themselves coarse and vulgar and in some sense dangerous. I mean, isn't this the same kind of demonizing that, for instance, the Yankees were doing about the Irish a few years ago?
Listen, Chris, I think you are making too much out of some of these comments. You are building them up in your own mind. If you take what Pat
I'm not the only one who's doing
I know
it, Mr.
you're
Buchanan.
not. Several other liberals are doing the same thing. They have problems with what I say. But look, everything I've said out there, I think I can defend and have defended. I don't have any difficulty with it. And millions of Americans are saying the same thing. Let me go back to illegal immigration. I saw statistics where 75% of Hispanic Americans, 75% of black Americans, and 75% of white Americans think it's a serious problem. I go down to Texas. The Dallas Morning News has an editorial that sounds just like Pat Buchanan. But you get up here in Washington, and people are semi-hysterical over views I've taken in a syndicated column published in 180 newspapers.
Mr. Buchanan?
And I don't understand it, yeah.
Well, we'll continue our discussion. We have to break in here briefly, but we'll continue our discussion in a moment. Continuing our discussion now with Republican presidential candidate Pat Buchanan. Mr. Buchanan, one of the recurring voting patterns during this campaign so far has been how poorly you do with Republican women.
Right.
How do you explain that?
I've got a 15-point gender gap with women, which was pretty similar to what Ronald Reagan had. And when I do very well with men, I do better with women, and that 15-point gender gap remains. I think, Chris, it's because Pat Buchanan is seen as challenging the establishment and something of a figure who is going to overthrow the establishment. And many women are conservative in a traditional sense and don't like radical change. Secondly, women, Republican women especially, tend to be the most loyal of Republicans, and they stand by their man, if you will, right to the end. When Richard Nixon was almost finished in Watergate, it was the Republican women who were standing with him. And I think George Bush gets the benefit of that.
Mr. Buchanan, some people have also suggested that when Republican women see what it is that you've had to say about them, that's the reason that they don't vote for you. There's the famous quote that the president has used in some of his commercials, that women are, quote, less equipped psychologically to handle the business world, but there's a lot more you've written.
But that's not exact. In the very fact
that is the quote.
Let me just ask the
question.
All right, sure.
And you say that you once called feminists, quote, harridans wielding the castrator's knife. Do you believe all that stuff?
That harridans wielding the castrator's knife was the women outside this hotel up here who wanted to finish off every Democratic senator who voted for Clarence Thomas. That was a funny, witty line in my judgment and perfectly applicable. Now, as for George Bush's ads, does it not manifest the bankruptcy of the presidency of the United States that they are digging up 10-year-old columns and taking out 3 words and putting them into attack ads? George Bush can't defend his administration, Chris. That's why he's got to be reduced to the kind of campaign he's running against a man who was a television commentator 13 weeks ago.
But Mr. Buchanan, the fact is you do have a record, and you haven't voted.
I'm very proud of it.
Well, let's talk about it then.
Sure.
For instance, in one of your columns, and this is on the issue of what you think of women, after the ERA amendment was defeated, you suggested that women might be more comfortable as wives or mothers, and you said, and again I quote, the mama bird builds the nest. So it was, so it ever shall be.
The mama bird does build the nest, Chris, and I was defending the decision of millions of women to leave the marketplace and careers to have children and raise families. Whatever role a woman decides on in society, including a lifelong role of wife and mother, deserves respect. And what bothers me about the feminists is the trashing of people like my mother, who at 17 years old came to this town, at 23 raised 9 kids her whole life, and then to see these characters come out and say that is a lesser role in society does indeed bug me, and the term harridans does apply to people that say that.
All right, let me move on, if I can, to one of the other controversies, and that involves your comments about Jewish Americans. You told Jewish hecklers recently out on the campaign trail, quote, this rally is of Americans and by Americans and for the good old U.S. of A.
I said that to a whole rally in Marietta, Georgia. Well, that is the line I have used with press people from foreign governments. What are you going to do about us, this, that, and the other? I have told everybody, Chris, this is an America First campaign. I am fighting about and debating about the future of my country. I am fed up with foreign agents, registered and unregistered, influencing my government.
But these were Jewish hecklers who were accusing you of being anti-Semitic.
This was a huge rally in Marietta, Georgia, and that was addressed to the whole rally. But listen, let me talk about one of those guys you called a heckler. His name is Rabbi Weiss, and he is one of the defenders, as I understand it, of Jonathan Pollard, who is a traitor and spy who stole our secrets and gave them to the Israeli government, and according to Seymour Hersh, the Israeli government then gave them to the Soviet Union.
But now, Mr. Buchanan, without getting into the Pollard case, there has been this recurrent theme, people saying that you are suggesting that Jewish Americans have divided loyalties about this country.
That is nonsense. I have a tremendous number of Jewish supporters, people writing op-ed pieces for me, but I will say this. There's no doubt about it. I am against the agenda of AIPAC, the Israeli lobby. I don't think this country should continue to give $3 million or $5 billion every single year to a government that treats the Palestinian people on the West Bank the way the Sharon Shamir government treats them. The Palestinian people and the Jewish people in Israel both have God-given rights to self-determination in their own homelands, and I don't want my money going to persecute anybody.
Mr. Buchanan, we only have
Sure.
a little bit more than a minute left, and I want to give you that time as I ask this question. You know, there's a lot of fierce debate between Republicans and Democrats in this town, but most politicians go through their entire lives without ever being called anything close to fascist or racist or anti-Semitic. How do you explain the fact that in just the last few weeks you've been called all three?
Two reasons. One, I'm doing so very well in the primaries and they are terrified. Secondly, I'm one of the few people in this city, Chris, who's had the guts to stand up to the agenda of the special interests, whether it's the civil rights lobbyist or the AIPAC lobby or the gay rights lobby, and say that their agenda is not in the interest of a good society and not in the interest of my country. And I say it again and again and again. And when they come after me and call me names, Pat Buchanan doesn't back down. That's why he gets called silly names like fascist by folks like Bill Bennett, who wouldn't even know what it meant.
We have about 20 seconds left. Is there anything you're going to do to reach out to Jews or to women or minorities to say it isn't so?
I'll tell you what I offer. Pat Buchanan would defend the constitutional and civil rights of every single American. He believes everybody in this country has equal rights. But I do believe in this. We got to get away from the idea of hyphenated Americanisms. We are all Americans wherever we came from. And I do believe that deeply. And this whole idea of ethnic entitlements should go out the window.
I'm sorry, we've got to leave it right there.
Okay.
Thank you very much for answering these questions directly tonight.
Sure.
And we'll be back in a moment. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Chris Wallace in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
Nightline is a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.